Welcome back to True Crime Convos. I'm your host, Lanie, host of the independent podcast, True Crime Cases with Lanie, and It's Haunted, What Now?, my paranormal podcast where I share spooky tales submitted by you, the listener. And today I'm joined by a very special guest, Laurah Norton, author of the newly released New York Times bestseller. Well, eventually, I hope that will be the case. I'm trying to help you manifest that. The book is titled Lay Them to Rest, and it takes readers on a really captivating and gripping journey of solving a cold case in real time. It left me and probably other readers of several of our friends have actually read the book already. And I think I walked away way more educated on the different methods that go into the identification of John and Jane Does, but it also makes us aware of the complex ethics that kind of go into these cases. And solving them. But that's not all Laurah's known for. She's also the host of a critically acclaimed podcast called the Fall Line Podcast, and that podcast focuses on covering cold cases in the Southeast. And another podcast, which is one of my favorites, is One Strange Thing, and that one delves into unexplainable stories from American News Archives. The latest release, which I think was a rebroadcast of A Vampire Story, was so good, and I was glad it came back up on my feed. So please help me welcome Laurah to the show. Let's insert applause effects. So welcome. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for allowing me to read the book before the general audience gets to. I thought it was really, really kind of you to trust me with this, piece of material, and you did such a phenomenal job with it.
Well, I knew I could trust my friends with the galley. If you're not someone who is familiar with publishing, a galley is the uncorrected copy with like typos and mistakes. And I knew that my friends I could send them to and they wouldn't like screenshot them and be like, lol, and send them back to me. So,
well, mean,
well, maybe a few.
We may still do that.
I can take it from loved ones. So, but yeah, I was really excited to share it early with my friends. And I have so many wonderful friends in podcasting and literature who were kind enough to read it ahead of time and help me share it with the world, because this really is a community. And I was able to draw on the friends I've made over the past 6 years in forensic science and podcasting and writing to help me get the word out there, because we are people who are independent podcasters. So that part is really important. So I'm just really grateful for all the folks who have pulled together to help me.
It's incredible to see how this community has kind of come together for you to support you in this, and it makes it kind of inspiring for those who are maybe looking to self-publish a book or do anything else and know that they can lean on this community, especially with the type of work that you're doing and the type of message that you're trying to get out about these cold cases, how Jane and John Does are identified, and then introducing completely new task force to people that may not have any clue about them and how they exist, like the Trans Doe Task Force, which we'll kind of get into later on. Now, speaking of the book, it's set to release October 17th, 2023. And it's available for pre-order right now. If you shop on Amazon, go add it to your cart right now. You can also support indie bookstores. I'm a huge fan of independent bookstores and want to keep them alive as long as possible. So if you use bookshop.org, you can go there. And I think your publishing company, are they doing a giveaway or a promotion of some sort, right?
Yes, and I think I have this memorized, so let me mention this. So if you order from the Hachette website, so it's pronounced Hachette, but it's spelled like hatchet with 2 E's and an E, Hachette. So you've probably seen it and said hatchet, right? Yeah. But Hachette is a wonderful publishing company. They're one of the bigger ones, but so you would assume that maybe like it's this big conglomerate, but they're wonderful and kind and pay a lot of attention to what they publish, just really great people. So if you go to their website and to the page for my book, not only do they have a 20% off discount code for my book through the day of release, which is Lay Them to Rest, easy to remember, but there are actually 2 bonuses you get if you order before the 17th. One of them is something that your listeners and viewers will be familiar with, which is a Zoom hangout with Josh Hallmark. Yes.
Exciting.
Yeah, Josh was kind enough for me to text / beg / cajole him to do this with me. And it's a
Yeah.
hangout. We're going to discuss how we use research to try and actually solve cases. Because a lot of people don't realize that if you are good at archival research and primary research, you can solve a case that way. And we're going to talk about how we use that research to work specifically on unidentified persons cases, how we use NamUs, how we use Megan's wonderful project, the Charlie Project, to use, so many of these resources. So just buying one copy gets you into that. It also gets you a premium podcast episode I recorded on a case I encountered when I was researching the book and I was in Illinois. I was in the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, and when I was there, I saw this big stack of files. They had files all over the walls, but there was this big stack up by themselves. And I asked them what it was, and they said, that's the Dardine family. And I hadn't heard of the Dardine family before, just maybe being from the South. And I found out that it was a multiple person homicide. This family in this very small town of Ina, Illinois, we'll be talking about Ina later, I'm sure, had been murdered together. And it was a really awful crime. And at one point, it looked like it had been solved because a serial killer named Tommy Linsels had confessed to the crime. But then he recanted. And that recantation is something that their family takes seriously. They do not believe that he committed the crimes. So,
Right.
and I agree with them because he recanted many other crimes. But unfortunately, since that time, the case has not really been investigated. Sells was never charged. So I really wanted to do a deep dive on that case. And none of my other platforms really allow for that because it was a case that's gotten a lot of press. The Fall Line covers cases that have gotten no press. But I did want to put out an episode that gave them a little more press, more recent press, and really dug into the archives on that case. So that does come with the book as well.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to do that too because I love that. And I'll do one for a listener as
Let
well
me
so that they get a
Let
chance.
me do mention that if you already pre-ordered and you're sitting there like, well, I already bought it and I can't have that, you can have that. Anywhere you pre-ordered, if you pre-ordered in February, you just go to the Hachette website, scroll all the way to the bottom, and it has info where you can enter your receipt and you can get the bonuses. So
Awesome. Okay, I love that. That's so exciting. And honestly, being able to sit in on any type of session where you get to hear Laurah and Josh kind of go over what goes into their process is something that will definitely make pre-ordering this book like not seem, like a big deal because it is you get such a great thing out of that, out of connecting with you and Josh on it. So you both are incredibly intelligent. I was so excited to see Josh in the book. I love Josh. I feel like I've been with him since before he blew up with True Crime BS. And I'm so proud of the strides that he's made within the podcasting world and all of the other things that he's helped do. He's doing it right, in my opinion, and I think you're doing it right too, which is why I'm always so happy to help spread whatever message you ever want to spread about any case that you're working on. But I've always been curious. So, I've seen podcasters kind of make either self-published books or work with a publishing company to compile their episodes together into a book format. And I was always interested about how, that process got started. How are you motivated to say like, hey, I should write a book about this? Like, how did you come up with the idea that you wanted to create a concept around either featuring Ina's case or just the fact that you wanted to, dive into cold cases and does? Like, how did this whole concept come to be?
Sure. So I don't know how unusual this is among podcasters, but I was an English professor for 15 years. I've been a professional writer since 2005. So, because my degrees are in creative writing. So I think a lot of English professors are maybe in literature. So when you're in creative writing, you're expected to publish. So I've been publishing that whole time. Yeah.
Oh.
So my work is mostly in short form. So I wrote short stories, creative nonfiction. That was my area. And I had been asked to write a book before, but I was like, yeah, I like writing short stuff. And so then I started working on podcasts, and that was long form for me. I didn't really have time to write a book because I was doing all that intensive research. How this book came about was when we did our series on the victims of Samuel Little, which was the most intensive thing
Incredible
we
stuff.
did besides our series on the Grady babies kidnappings. That was our other most intensive series that we've done.
Mm-hmm.
I got a lot of queries from editors who were interested in me working on a book. But they wanted something about serial killers, which is not something I'm interested in writing about, because the whole point of the Samuel Little series was to not write about Samuel Little. We sat
Mm-hmm.
down and said, for the series, we want Samuel Little to be a ghost. If he ever heard this, we'd want him to be furious. We'd want him to see himself as an invisible person in the background fading away as the people who matter come forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the people who matter, and the people who matter are the people who get the least attention. So I said, what I want to do is write about my passion area, which is unidentified persons. And I also want to write about forensic science, because I have been having to learn about forensic science in order to really work on these case files. And I want to write about the people who've been teaching me. And
Yeah.
luckily, my literary agent was very supportive of that. And then the editors who read my work were very supportive of that. And I found the perfect home at Hachette, with a really, really great editor who saw exactly what I wanted to do. I have a working partner, Dr. Amy Michael, who's a biological anthropologist who practices forensic anthropology. She's been a really good friend of mine for years. We work on cases together. There's always like 10, 12, 15, 20 cases going. And a case that we had been hoping to get for a while to work on lined up perfectly. So that became the focal case of the book. So that's kind of how it got started. I don't know a lot about self publishing and indie publishing. 15 years ago when I was teaching, I would tell kids to stay away from that because it was vanity publishing.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's a whole different ballgame. It's a really
Yeah.
great and thriving world. And I would tell students now, if I had them in the classroom, look into it because people are succeeding. And it's not a place
Yeah.
where people are preying on you. People are doing wonderful work there. I just don't have a lot of experience with it. So,
How was the you've recently been featured, right, as one of the TikTokers in true crime that's kind of doing it right and all this stuff. I was so ecstatic to see you. Our mutual friend Sarah Turney was on there and other wonderful and responsible true crime creators on TikTok because it can be kind of grimy, right? And I think within any niche in TikTok, you have some great creators and then you have some not so great creators. So how have you noticed the shift in, right, we've been podcasting for a while now, right, and social media for the longest time was based off of Twitter for the most part, like a lot of our stuff was Twitter based, but TikTok came and then all of a sudden you had this kind of world opened up to you as a podcaster, and there's some podcasters who got on that train early and were like, hey, I'm building an audience on there. I think about Bob Mata for Defense Diary, who has like 25,000 you know followers on there. So how has social media helped you in this particular case with promoting the book and then also maybe even bringing awareness to cases that you're working on that aren't featured in the book?
well, Lainey, people who are watching this will be like, why was she laughing so hard? I was laughing so hard because like TikTok is a steep learning curve for me. Sarah encourages me every day. She's like, look, you got featured. You're getting better. When like, meanwhile, like I'm hanging on by a thread. I love watching TikTok. Like I spend a lot of time on TikTok. I love it. Part of
Same.
this is perhaps like, I do not have the maturity I should for my age. Like I'm like 10 years younger mentally, but I love TikTok. But learning how to use it to use
Mm-hmm.
social media for cases. But I often say that the fall line has listeners versus maybe fans, which I don't think is a bad
Mm-hmm.
thing. But we've always been very much in the background because we're foregrounding cases. And so I think the thing is, a lot of times if you have fans, fans want your stuff. You know what I mean? And fall line listeners want to act. They want to help a
Mm-hmm.
case. And so now I'm kind of learning how to say, hi, I'm the person you've been listening to for 6 years. I did this thing that I think is really useful information that will teach you so many
Mm-hmm.
things and it helps cases. But also buy my stuff, which is a really incredibly uncomfortable position for me to be in. I don't even like to tell people what my favorite color is or like anything about me, or have my picture
Yeah.
taken, or have any attention at all. So it's really strange. So I'm trying to learn how to use social media in the way that I think a lot of people like you or Sarah or Charlie or a lot of our other friends are able to do more naturally. It's a learning
Mhm.
curve.
No, and I think one of the great things about you is that you're deliberate in what you post, right? So it's never like really off the cuff. Like for some of my stuff, sometimes when I get pissed off at people, as you know, I kind of just like jump on and I'm like, hey, I'm really upset and angry about this. Okay, bye. And then I move on because I got it out and, word vomited on TikTok. But I really like that you, and even Sarah too, both of you have this way of bringing forward a message that is A, concise, and B, impact. It's never something that I'm thinking, "Oh, this was just a flippant thing she decided to do." Like some of my stuff is, right? Because my social media across the board outside of TikTok is streamlined to the specific show that I host, right? So I have one specific to true crime cases and to my paranormal show and then to my voice acting. But TikTok is kind of like my kitchen sink. I throw everything in there. I'm like, you want to talk about a podcast? Sure. You want to talk about this cool new product I found? Amazing. But I really think that it's been interesting to see you kind of broach this because I do know you're a private person and stuff, and you are doing such a great job, I think, of utilizing it in a way that is comfortable for you, but then also is maintaining the boundaries, which sometimes creators can have a really hard time doing, is creating boundaries for themselves when it comes to utilizing their social media and how much of themselves they reveal to their audience, right? And you do a great job in the book of this too, is that you give us, if we didn't know you, right? Like if I didn't know you, you do a really fantastic job of letting us know your kind of humor that, we all know and love you for, personally, and the insightfulness that you have and the questions that you ask yourself whenever you were going through the research or whenever you were looking through documents or engaging with Amy, even in the college students who were helping you and other of the forensic professionals that you worked with. I thought it was really great that you offered that insight, and it just demonstrates to me how serious you took this process and how much restraint you likely showed when it came to how much information you gave away.
They had to
Thank you,
pull
the
it
end.
out of me sometimes. I
I'm not
Yeah,
surprised.
they if it was up to me, it would have been like I was there. Do you know what I mean? They had to be like, put a little more of yourself in there. It's hard, I don't, but then,
Yeah.
people, it's, I have to take my own advice because when I write about doe cases, I tell people all the time that it's hard to get doe cases attention because people have been disconnected from their identities. I talk about this a lot, but I really cannot stand the phrase giving someone back their name because that implies that you have
Mm.
a power and that you're granting someone something. I don't like it
Wow.
because they have never not had their names. You are not giving them something. They have been disconnected from the identity that they've always had, and they've only been disconnected in an official paper way. They have their names. I don't like that idea. The
Mm.
humanity is always there. It just implies a giving and taking, a power imbalance that
Hmm.
bothers me. This is probably just semantic, but
No, I love that. Like, I mean, truly, for me, because I've said that before.
we
I've
we
done
all
that. I'm like,
have.
I'm glad this
Yeah.
person got their name back.
Yeah. We
Um,
all have.
but it's a great way to be introspective about it and be responsible with it. I love that.
And there's not a perfect phrase for it. You know what I mean? But just the idea, it's
Yeah.
simply what I think about it is like, for some reason, this thread popped, this thread popped, this
Mm.
thread popped, right? But piece A and piece B
Hmm.
are still there, you know?
Right.
And I think when people say something like giving someone back their names, I don't want people to feel bad about it because you're just trying to express a kind thankfulness. Do you know what I mean? But I
Hmm.
think sometimes it's when people on the side of doing the good thing think too much about
Hmm.
how great they are for doing that, that's where the danger comes in. Because when it's the same idea of like when we do a service for a family, whether it's giving a
Hmm.
family a platform to speak, right, or lending a skill, one thing that Brooke always says is that does not mean that we have any more wisdom than a family,
Mm-hmm.
that we know better than the family does, than their story, that we have all we are doing is offering a skill set. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
We're not in a higher
Yeah.
position of power. And sometimes to me, the give take language is a power differential that makes me uncomfortable, right? But
Mm-hmm.
when it gets into the language of storytelling, I know for a fact that in a Doe story, you have to give people something to grab onto to connect to the story because they've been
Mm-hmm.
disconnected. And that's when I began to learn about science and everything I could about demographics and finding other stories nearby that could be related so that I could help people emotionally connect to the story. That's why I learned about the scientists, so I could talk about the scientists. And then
Right.
eventually, people smarter than myself, my friends, would say, you have to talk about yourself too to help connect the dots there, to create the full emotional
Right.
experience. And that's when I said, okay, I'll
Yes.
quit being stubborn. But
Yes.
because
Thank you for
that's a
that.
thread too, right? That
It is. It is. And I mean, again, so I'm a voracious reader. I love reading, and part of that is being able to connect with the characters, right? I read nonfiction and fiction books. In fiction, I definitely want to connect with the characters so I can, stay along with the story and be invested in it. With nonfiction, I want to feel like I'm standing right there with you, that I'm watching you do these things and going like, wow. Which is what I felt like the entire time I was reading it. I have a very big imagination, so Amy was not what I thought she looked like. Whenever you showed a picture of her to me, I was like, "Oh my god, okay." Nobody was how I imagined except you, right? I purposefully didn't want to look at anything regarding the case or anything like that because I wanted to keep it real. And one of the things I noticed is you're very inspiring to me in terms of your dedication to families and how you interact with them and how you maintain connections with them, right? And there are other creators within this space who do the same thing. I think about Vincent from Gone Cold, who literally anytime he's um, connected with a family, he maintains this connection with them throughout, regardless of how long ago the episode he released, was done. He's maintaining these connections, which is something that I struggle to do, even in general in my own life, like with my friends. And so taking on creating and maintaining these long-term connections of saying like, yeah, I'm always going to advocate for you, I'm always going to do this, it feels like it would be such a strong emotional pull on yourself. And so do you ever experience that? Like, do you ever feel like you have to balance this emotional toll of working on these cases and helping these families with this passion for justice that you have, like wanting to identify these families or wanting to find answers, like for the twins case, for instance, like wanting to find all of this and then feeling like maybe I'm letting them down because I'm not doing enough. Like that's how I think I would feel. I would feel like I'm not doing enough and I could be doing more. But then I have all of these other obligations like at home and stuff.
Well, when it comes to the cases for the fall line, I do want to highlight that a lot of that falls on Brooke too. So for people
Mm-hmm.
who may not know, my co-creator for the fall line, and you don't hear her a lot, so I think people forget she's there because she doesn't like to be on mic. But
She doesn't.
Brooke Hargrove is a licensed professional counselor, and like 70% of her job, if not 80% of her job, is communicating with families because she's trained to do that. And it's her
Mm-hmm.
job to not only do initial meetings with families, but to send families questions ahead of time, to do the interviews to make sure they're trauma informed, to make sure that families get their transcripts afterwards to read over, to do follow up. And then that's the point where I come in and I'm working with families on scripts. And that's also when I'm getting people to resources like Season of Justice. And we're going back and forth. And like maybe if a family's having a hard time connecting with one law enforcement agency, that's where, if they're in the South, I can pull in some of my connections and say, well, try this person, try
Mm-hmm.
this person. That's when we start sending out like press releases, things like that. Um, but every family is different. You know what I mean? Some
Mm-hmm.
families say, "I want you to do this," and they don't want continual contact. They want us to be a media resource for them. And some
Mm-hmm.
families, we're in regular contact with, right?
Yeah.
Or they just want us to have like, publish an update for them. Some families like Arlene, someone you and I know both, really well, from Leon Laurelis's
Mm-hmm.
case. like in, weekly contact. But I
Yeah.
think a difference is on a case where you work on the case from the beginning to the end, like the case in my book, where we start with a person who is unidentified and they are identified. I mean, I don't feel like that's a big spoiler because this case has resolution. And then I spend a
Yeah.
lot of time with the family, um, and still work with them today. I meet the family at the point where the case is resolved, and I'm still working with them today. And I think the
Yeah.
difference is there is that most people who work on a case, they end contact with the family when the case is resolved. And it's not that they cut a
Hmm.
family off, it's simply that that's their forensic job. Whether, it's a scientist or a genealogist, because that's professionally correct. So
Hmm.
the only person they'd be in contact with at that point is law enforcement. And law enforcement checks in every so often. But I think
Yeah.
people, when you watch Dateline or 48 Hours or whatever else, and this is something I had to learn because I used to think, and I bet you feel this way too, because for those of us
Hmm.
who really want to see cases solved, and that's why a lot of us got into this in the first place, is you think I can find that piece and it clicks in and
Hmm.
it's everything's okay. But the problem is, and this is what I've had to figure out, is it's not, because
Yeah.
there's, even if someone's ID'd, and even if it's not a homicide, in this case, we're dealing with a homicide, but even if it's not, a family still has questions, they have trauma, they have so many other things. So
Yeah.
the aftermath of that has taught me so much that it's not over. Some things are
Right.
resolved, but there's so much that goes on afterwards. Healing,
Y-
processing, memorials,
Yeah.
so it's just, I think that it's a very different kind of process. Supporting a family before they have answers, supporting a family when they have some answers, and supporting a family after they have answers. And that can't all fall on someone without training. It's also getting people
Yeah.
to the right places. So,
Yeah. No, I think that's really important to note that, like, a lot of the people that I admire do have, a background in victim advocacy. Like Kristen Seavey
mm-hmm.
from Murder She Told is a certified victims advocate. Um, and Brooke on the fall line, is a licensed professional. So there's, it's not to say that you can't be like Vincent is not, a licensed victims advocate, but he's incredibly empathetic and he's resolute on doing things the right way and for his own integrity and everything. And I think if anybody meets or listens to that podcast and meets Vincent, they automatically get it. Um, there were some exciting parts in the book. We get to meet Lucy, who is, as I imagined, a little like snuffleupagus, like mouth, nose breathing pug type of dog and very old.
She's
I was
partially
surprised.
paralyzed too, which I don't think. Yeah,
Oh, no, I don't think
yeah,
you said
yeah.
that.
She's, well, she has a little harness, so you know,
She's carried
yeah.
around. But you also include, because you were introduced by Amy to the franchise 90 Day Fiancé, which I watched before the 90 days and beyond the other way. Um, and I thought that that was great that you included that because, you weren't a reality TV watcher before, as you said. Um, but I wanted to understand why you included it. Was it to add some levity? Was it just to go like, hey, we need a break in this seriousness and we need to have like a highlight?
No, because it's a giant part of hanging out with forensic anthropologists. They all watch the trashiest television. I know you're a Bravo girl. They don't watch
Hmm.
Bravo. They don't watch The Bachelor. They watch, okay, to a person.
TLC.
They watch TLC and they watch Love Is Blind and The Ultimatum, the Ultimatum, but just the queer version. We only like that one.
Hmm.
All of them, all of them that I know, and they got me into it. I had surgery, and we only had one TV in the house for a long time. So between my husband and my son, like I was done for. Like I didn't watch TV for like
Hmm.
2 or 3 years, and that's not a brag. That was like, unless I wanted to watch it on my phone, I just didn't know what was
It wasn't
happening
happening.
until, like, yeah,
Yeah.
unless they were all gone and I was alone. And this is when I was still teaching, so it's not like I was working from home. Like I was just, oh well, for me, you know. It's
Hmm.
like some child show where my husband's weird super, like that.
Supernatural soap
You know what I
operas.
mean?
Yeah.
Like literally like supernatural. Yeah, like that
Supernatural.
stuff. I'm like, I guess you can go watch your supernatural soap opera, guy. But
Oh, Jensen was in Days of Our Lives. I do know that because my best friend dated his cousin.
oh
So,
well, I'll maybe I'll come home and my husband will be watching Days of Our Lives because he sure likes Jensen Ackles a lot. But
yeah.
when I had surgery, I was sitting watching, Amy was like, okay, now's the time. I mean, I think that they probably need to let their brains have a break. I don't know if it's from the cultural anthropology background. Like, I'm sure I
Mm-hmm.
could like BS you an answer if I really wanted to. But I think it's just like something stupid to do. You know what I mean? When
100%.
probably
Yes.
from like looking at horrific things all day long. I know that helps me. And now
Yeah.
my biggest, by the way, accomplishment of the past year is our friend Kristen Seavey from Murder She Told, which is like an extremely well put together, well written, beautiful podcast, so sensitive. She's a victim's
Mm-hmm.
advocate. She's so kind and smart. Like she's personally working on trying to solve some cases. I've ruined her. She watched 6 seasons of 90 Day Fiance before the 90 days. She's on to the other
Oh, I love
way.
it.
She just is sending me the kind of text messages you read about in the book daily while she's editing. So I feel really proud of that I've probably brought down our IQ at least 10 points in the past couple of
That's
months.
okay.
So
I'm so proud. I'm honestly
I feel
thrilled because now we'll have something to talk about next week. Um, because who's your okay? So from the original franchise, 90 Day Fiance, who's the couple you always are like, God, these people? Danielle and Mohammed will always be
yeah.
ace for me. Because it was just a gem and very sad to watch.
They're canon just for, catchphrases like evidence, and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. There's just certain things, right?
Yes.
But there's a newer couple that's a little more fascinating. I don't know the last time you watched. Yeah,
Jasmine?
Gino and Jasmine. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I was well, when we were first introduced to her, I was very like, "Oh, great. Like she's super educated, like she's going to be like." And then it just goes super downhill after that. Like incredibly jealous and Gino's just weird. So yeah, if you don't watch 90 Day Fiance, highly recommend because I do the same thing. Like I watch reality TV because I want to be able to disconnect from my day job and then what I also do on the podcast, right? Like I do very heavy things. Like employee relations is not the field of HR you get into if you want to have fun all day, you know? It is my own version of a reality show, is what I'll say. It's like I new characters every day, new issues every day. My people aren't fighting over like who cheated and who didn't do what. It's how they looked at me. Did they use a trash can in my area? Did they move my chair? Things like that. So all the fun stuff you get to deal with professionals, which is my favorite. Um,
I just keep but sadly, all I want to do is go on a reality TV podcast and talk about my love for Love is Blind, but no one ever invites me because they're like, oh, you're busy with your files. And I'm so
like with your
sad.
fight, you can't talk about Love is Blind. I only watched the first one, but I hear the other ones, like the other after one, are still pretty good and stuff. But I was really invested in one. I hate like TV shows that get people married or whatever end result because I get so invested. I have a strong parasocial relationships with people. I admit that about myself, but that's just because I don't know. I enjoy it. And then I get really sad when they break up. So it is what it is. Now back to your writing process. So I know what it's like to research and write, a podcast episode. I don't go to the depths that you guys do, like you and Josh do it or anything like that, because you're doing investigative podcasting. And I think that's really different than what I do, right? Like I'm sharing a case and then sharing another case the next episode. So I very rarely stay on the same thing or on the same topic. So, how is that writing process different from working on the book, for instance? Like, were you writing when you're investigating Ina's case, are you writing a book at the same time, or is this like well after Ina's case has been solved and you're like, no, I'm going to write a book about this?
Yes and no. So I'm working on the book and working on the case at the same time, but like in bits and pieces. So the whole time I'm
Mm.
working, I'm recording. Like 95% of what I did was recorded. Um,
Which we know you don't do well in the field,
Yeah.
apparently, according to the
Well,
book.
yeah, I can do it well in the field, like in a good setup, like if I'm recording like a nice interview. But
Yeah.
recording Amy is like trying to walk a cat. She if you put a microphone in front of her, she suddenly acts like she's in an interrogation room. So,
Right. She's like, I
yeah, I gotta
guess.
stick them around. And then, like, of course, then they have me in a room where they're trying to do a forensic exam in an attic, and I'm trying to record them all, but they're also demanding that I provide them with light. So that's really fun. But yeah, I recorded almost everything, like whether it was on my phone or like my field setup. So I had notes constantly. All of those
Mm-hmm.
interviews I was doing with experts, I was doing them the whole time. So I had
Oh,
some from
wow.
2 years ago, some from 6 months ago. And so I was bringing them in the whole time. And cause like it would be hard, someone would be in the field, like in a different country, I'd be bringing them in.
Yeah.
I was doing research on cases. And, one thing is, several conversations would have to sometimes be condensed. That's why that note's in the book, because you literally do not want things to be in real time sometimes. Because if I
Yeah.
talk to someone here and then I talk to them again 8 hours later, you don't want that. You want it to be one conversation,
Right.
or you want to fall asleep. But so we're doing all of that. The events in the book happened in the order they happened in, because it's a very clear timeline and you have to show a case
Mm-hmm.
in the order that it happened in. And we just laid out in terms of the science to match the order of the book so that people could understand what was happening, at the same time.
Yeah.
So if we're about to get into the forensic anthropology, you got to understand forensic anthropology. I'm going to explain odontology, which is forensic study of teeth, right before we go to the dentist, so you can understand that part. But
Right.
yeah, I was writing bits and pieces, you know what I mean? So I'd write up like my
Mm-hmm.
thoughts on a day, and then I'd start working on a chapter. But the bulk of the writing happened right after the solve. And then I basically wrote day and night.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, I don't even know how you guys do things like that, where you have this recollection outside of the audio recordings of thinking, like, this is what I did. Like, how do you maintain something like that recollection in your head of like these steps you took? Is it just based off of the recordings that your memories jogged, or you're like, oh yeah, we did this, or notes I took?
Massive notes. So
Yeah.
massive notes, recordings, text message. Amy and I have, thousands of text messages, you know what I mean? And so I would copy those into Word documents, emails back and forth, or Discord. That was a big thing with when I was following Redgrave Research, who are the forensic
Mm-hmm.
investigative genetic genealogists who identified Ina Jane Doe. They were very polite in that they had a Discord. So that was helpful.
That was so, oh man, yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh. I don't even know how to use Discord, so I totally empathized with you there. I
Oh
was
my
like,
God.
I wouldn't know what to do. But I hated that you missed it. Like, I was like, no. But also, I wouldn't have been able. I'm the same way. I was like, 9 o'clock is my
Okay,
bedtime,
like
guys. I
in
cannot.
my defense, I know that they are incredibly talented, but so this is just a little fun thing. I haven't talked about this yet, so it's just for your listeners. Okay. Yeah, just for your listeners.
Exclusive.
So I knew they were really good because
Hmm.
not only have I known them for a long time, and so this is Redgrave Forensic Research Services. They're also the Transdo Task Force. That's their nonprofit. But I've
Hmm.
known Lee and Anthony and Victor Veldstra for a long time. But I knew that they were going to identify her, not only because they're good, but because they found my husband's father. And
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
and
You.
they
Hmm.
found him very quickly. Um, and he's not, my husband's not adopted, so it wasn't an
Hmm.
adoption case. And it turned out he had died a very long time ago, like when he was 18. So
Oh, wow.
but so I knew how quickly they could work, but that at least had taken like a day or two, you know what I mean? So I wasn't expecting them to
Yeah.
solve it in a couple of hours, or maybe I wouldn't have gone to sleep. um But, so luckily they had notes in Discord. There was just so many things I can pull from. When there was a press conference, that was luckily broadcast and I taped it.
Hmm.
So I just had so much material to work from. And also, having been a creative writer for 15, 20 years, well, and then professionally, and then my whole life before that,
Hmm.
you just get good at remembering things and describing scenes, I think, maybe. So.
Amazing. Brag. I love that.
I mean, I figure
So,
with all those student loans, I can brag a little, right?
Right? You should. I mean, my God. Let's hope they get forgiven soon. My chair keeps going down, so apologies. Um, One thing I thought was interesting. So I do voice acting, as you know, and I've also narrated some audiobooks. And I was very excited at the, idea that you were going to be releasing an audiobook of the audiobook version of the book, because that's typically it's what I would have preferred for myself, because I love listening to your voice. I've already told you this a billion times. Fangirl over here on Laurah Norton's voice, number one. Nobody can take that from me. But I thought it was interesting that you kind of had to, audition. It wasn't just hey, you're going to narrate your audiobooks, which threw me for a loop, because I would think most companies would want their author to do it, but maybe some of their authors can't read a script that
I
well.
think it's actually normal to have the author audition if the author's a possibility. Because you and I
Really?
both know that reading a script naturally, like reading like you're talking, is hard.
Yes,
It
it
takes
is.
years. And so I had to audition. I think it was just to make sure that, because a lot of podcasts aren't scripted like ours are.
Right,
So
right. Mm-hmm.
and so I had to audition, and then I had to ask you for some tips for doing an audiobook.
I was like, get ready, girl,
Yeah.
because it's a long. How long did it take you to record it? Because I already pre-ordered it on my Audible, so I'm excited. But how long did it take you to actually go through the process?
6 days.
Oh, wow, that's pretty short. I mean, that's great.
6 days. It
You
was
know,
long.
yeah, it's intensive when you do it and it's back to back. I'm assuming.
No, it was broken up a little bit. Because
Oh, good.
of that. Some people may know this, some may not. I had chronic laryngitis that almost took my voice out for good. And so
Mm,
it's been, healed pretty much now, but they wanted to add in some
yeah,
days just in case I decided to go out again. So,
some
yeah.
rest to get you some rest. No, I think that's really great, and it's honestly healthy for your voice. That's why my books take at least like a month to work on it. So I can, because, I'm also recording for the shows, doing other projects and stuff. So I have to be really cognizant. And a lot of people don't maybe think about that when they're listening to audiobooks or listening to podcasts, about the impact it can have on your voice. Because this voice that I'm using now is not my podcast voice. It is not the voice you hear when you're listening to True Crime Case. It's also not the voice you're going to hear if you listen to any of the audiobooks I've done. Don't tell me if you ever do, because it would kill me if I knew. Don't ever,
Well, no,
please.
we're not breathing right now. If I talked like this, then
Yeah.
I would lose my voice in like an hour. Yeah.
Yes, it would be terrible. And I'm sitting down. So, key thing I would think, just a heads up for podcasters: stand up when you're recording. It helps so much with your breaths and making sure you read the sentence all the way through without going in the middle of your episode. One of the things we talked about at the beginning of the discussion was your collaboration with other forensic professionals and other experts within the field. I learned so much about teeth, about bones. But then